Welcome back to Breakdown. SEC versus the Big Ten. Today is July 26th, Monday. A lot has been going on in the prior week in the landscape of college football. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The thing that's been catching everybody's attention is that the fact that Oklahoma and Texas potentially coming to the SEC. With me is JJ and I'm Joe, and we're going to get started by me asking JJ a few questions.
Let's get it.
All right, JJ. With the addition of Oklahoma and Texas potentially coming to the SEC, does that settle the discussion as to what conference is the most dominant conference in the country?
Yeah, I think now the SEC can undoubtedly say that they're the best baseball conference in the country with adding Oklahoma and Texas. No, but seriously, in the realm of football, which is the dominant sport in college, I think that debate will be laid to rest with the acquisition of Oklahoma and Texas.
Agreed.
Specifically Oklahoma.
Well, I wouldn't discount Texas because there is a tremendous amount of possibility at Texas. Not just football, but there are basketball as well. Texas just has a lot of possibility.
They've had a lot of possibility for the past 40 to 50 years, but it's time for them to realize some of that, I guess.
Agreed. So is this the realignment of the SEC and the Big 12? Is this a foretaste of what's to come? Or is this just the end?
Well, I think in some ways, I do think that it is a preview of things to come. I don't think that conference alignment will just end with realignment will just end with Oklahoma and Texas. I think the ACC and the Big Ten will have to respond in some type of way just to compete. The playing field has shifted and they're at a competitive disadvantage right now. So I do believe that it does preview things to come in the future, but in other ways, I think the future will be even more large scale. I think there might be mergers between conferences.
Okay, you mentioned the fact that the Big Ten ACC has to do something. We're talking specifically about specifically, but in general, all other countries. But we're talking specifically about the Big Ten and the SEC. With the Big Ten and the SEC previously being neck and neck as far as the dominant conference, and now with the SEC potentially, if this happened down the road, I think it's like 2025 or whenever, with the SEC potentially becoming the dominant conference, and if the Big Ten want to rival their dominancy, what must the Big Ten do? Or what are some options available to the Big Ten?
I think what's the saying? Young men go west. I think for the Big Ten, old conference go south. I think that is the best chances that they have to compete. They're gonna have to expand in some directions, and given the footprint that the Big Ten is currently located, they can't really expand north. Expanding west takes them to like the Dakota, Great Plains area. So there's not a lot of football powerhouses in that respect. So the only real answer for them is to go south.
Okay, start naming some schools that potentially could be targeted.
The first school I would target is Houston, because I guarantee you that's the first school the Big 12 will target, just trying to keep their conference afloat. I believe that would be the likely target for the Big 12, so that would be my likely target for the Big 10. I would try to get my foot in the Texas door.
What makes Houston so appealing?
It's the fourth biggest city in America. It's in a state that is constantly growing somehow, and an incredibly fertile recruiting base. They just made the Final Four in basketball. They have a very prosperous athletics program that their donors and boosters invest in. They have the market size, they have the location.
What about their academics?
You know, they don't necessarily have that, but neither did Nebraska before Nebraska got in.
Okay.
I think the Big Ten has made concessions, for football in the past, and I think they're probably going to have to do that in the future.
How desperate do you think the Big Ten is to make a move?
I think they're incredibly desperate. They are the conference that made the most money last year, and going forward in the future, they are undoubtedly going to be finishing runner-up to the SEC for years to come. So I think any school that's used to finishing first isn't going to like taking a backseat to any conference, regardless of who it is, including the SEC.
I agree. So you mentioned Houston. Are there others?
Yeah, the other option that they have is the biggest school in the United States of America, which would be the University of Central Florida.
What makes that school appealing?
Well, outside of Texas, I think the state that you want to be in most when it comes to football is Florida. So I think that with UCF being centrally located in Florida, and just having
You know they already have a national title in football, right?
then bring a couple more on.
What year was that? They claimed themselves to be national champion when they went undefeated a few
I believe
years.
it's 2018, 2017 maybe.
Okay, all right.
But I mean, it's a tradition of many a Southern school to claim a illegitimate national title. As Alabama, I think, says that they have 18 or something when they really have like maybe 10.
Well, UCF has Auburn's old coach, Gus Malzahn. This will be his first year. Will he be successful at UCF?
I think UCF has the infrastructure. I think you'd have to be a bad coach to not be successful at UCF at this point in time. I think that with the infrastructure that they have and the conference that they're in, I think that they should dominate their conference year in and year out. I think Gus Malzahn is better than a bad coach, so I do think he will be successful.
So could you see another undefeated season and another national championship for UCF?
Yeah, until they join, a legitimate conference like the Big Ten. I could see that next year for them easily.
Okay, now you've mentioned Houston, you've mentioned UCF. I know there's numerous other schools out there. I'm going to give you a shot to mention one more, and then I want to mention one. So name another.
Well, if I can only name one more, I guess I'd have to pick Georgia Tech, just because sticking with the theme of southern states with fertile recruiting bases, I think if you can take a step into Georgia and take that away from just being a Georgia-only dominant, state to, having Georgia Tech be competitive in that state, I think that could be a path for them.
And Georgia Tech does have the academics.
Oh yeah, that's
Right.
that's like their calling card. Honestly, it's not their athletics probably.
Okay, so you've mentioned three teams, and you gave a good rationale and reason for them. You mentioned Houston, the Houston Cougars, UCF, the Knights, Georgia Tech. You failed to mention the elephant in the room.
West Virginia?
No, the Golden Dome,
Oh yeah.
Notre Dame, right here in Big Ten country.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that be the obvious choice?
I think you'd have to ask them on that one.
Is there nothing that the Big Ten could do to convince Notre Dame to join? They couldn't dangle enough money in front of Notre Dame to convince them to join.
I don't know. I feel like at this point in time, if Notre Dame hasn't joined the Big Ten, and they have halfway joined the ACC, they're in the ACC for all sports with the exception of football, which they only play 4 games a year in the ACC. I feel like that's a pretty loud and clear message to the Big Ten that they don't want to be in the Big Ten.
Would the Big Ten allow them to join as ACC did with only 4 games in football, but in the conference in every other sport? If you were commissioner of the Big Ten, would you be willing to do that?
I don't believe that I would be willing to do that. But I've historically underestimated like the impact of Notre Dame. I've just thought about it from like a football fan standpoint and not from a dollars and cents standpoint. And the fact of the matter is, Notre Dame makes a lot of money. So like that honestly, that'd be something I'd have to consider probably.
Okay. I think I would give it some really serious consideration, and I might pull that trigger that way, but that's neither here nor there. That's just speculation. Notre Dame, as you said, for years have been courted by the Big Ten, and for
spurned
years
them at every turn.
Yeah, but you know, if you pursue a girl often enough, you know, you might wear them down.
You know, I wouldn't know. I have a I have a one rejection rule for every girl. Like, if a girl rejects me once, she does not get a second opportunity. So that's
well said. Well said. We'll move on. Okay, Oklahoma and Texas. What two schools are the faces of the Big 12 right now, as we sit?
Oklahoma and Texas.
Okay, if Oklahoma and Texas leave the Big 12, what happens to the Big 12?
Well, then it becomes a basketball conference, and Kansas is the face of it. I mean, the best football team program that's left would be West Virginia, Oklahoma State. I literally don't know. Kansas State. It's very difficult to parse out.
Texas Tech has had its things. Oklahoma State. I would personally say Oklahoma State, but I wouldn't discount Baylor either.
Well, but West Virginia, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State have all been to BCS
right
games. Texas Tech has not. Texas
Tech
is in Texas, and I think that they get a lot of. I don't know.
Well, I've been to Lubbock, so I'm not gonna dish.
Sorry.
I'm not gonna dish Lubbock, but so the Big 12 would they seek additional schools?
They would have to keep their conference afloat. I mean, the Big 12 had the opportunity to add Louisville when Louisville left the Big East, and they rejected Louisville. So Louisville had to settle for the ACC, and Louisville, is thriving there. Had the Big 12 accepted them, had they added Louisville, maybe BYU, the Big 12 probably wouldn't be in the situation where they're in right now. But because they neglected to strengthen their conference when they had the opportunity to, I mean, I believe at this point in time, they'd have to consider any and all options because there's a 2025 TV deal renewal that's coming up. And if they want to make anywhere near the money that they made when Texas and Oklahoma was in there, they're going to have to add. I mean, I would imagine that they would look to add Houston, BYU, any UCF, any one that can increase their market share, any place that.
What about Memphis? Would they want to add Memphis?
Memphis is one of the historically worst football programs. I know that they've had a lot of success recently in the past 10 years, from Justin Fuente to Mike Norvell to their current coach, but I don't know if that's enough to sustain success for me.
How many schools do they need to add? They just to remain where they are. What is it? 10 schools to remain at 10. They need at least 2.
Yeah, and you want Houston and UCF. Those have to be atop their dream board.
Okay.
Retain West Virginia, retain Kansas, retain Oklahoma State, and then go add Houston, go add UCF.
Okay, interesting.
Maybe go add BYU. But there's that Mormon elephant in the room when it comes to them and what to do about Sundays. Especially
when it comes to basketball, a lot of Sunday games and things like that, scheduling games like that. The Big 12, will the Big 12 be around 6 years from now?
Not in the same capacity that it was. The Big East is still around as a conference, but it used to play football, I think the Big 12 is going to be following the footsteps of the Conference USA, the American Athletic Conference. I think it's just going to be a hodgepodge conference.
The Big 12, Big 8 has a lot of history. I'm up there in age. I'm on the other side of 27, way on the other side. But saying that, I say that because the Big 12 was around when I was a kid. Way. Well, at that time it's the Big 8. But but those schools, yeah, Texas, Oklahoma State, Nebraska, Kansas State, those schools.
Texas was in the Southwest Conference.
I'm sorry,
when we
you're
were a
right.
kid.
You're right. But those schools were around, and to see that conference disappear with that much history would be a sad thing for me.
It would be, and it's all because of Texas's greed.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, I would. I hate Texas.
Okay, we've talked about what's likely to happen to the Big 12, and they won't be around. Let's talk about the SEC.
All right, fair enough.
If Texas and Oklahoma comes into the SEC, what SEC schools will be harmed most by that?
Well, I think the school that would be harmed most would be the SEC school that would be harmed the most would be Texas. Just
Texas A&M.
No, just Texas. I consider them if we're considering them to be an SEC school, I think that they take a dramatic shift in prestige. I think that they're like the 6th or 7th best program in the conference. I'm more of a what have you done for me lately type of person than a potential person. I understand Texas has a wealth of potential, but when I looked up a graphic that displayed Texas's records from the 1970s until now, and when you take off Mac Brown's tenure there, they have woefully underperformed, and I think Texas moving to the SEC would be a huge dose of reality to them. I think it'd be a bit of a wake-up call. But Texas A&M would be the second. That would be the very next team I brought up, would be Texas A&M.
Well, I'm going to challenge your first assumption that Texas would be hurt.
Okay.
What happened to Texas A&M when they moved into the SEC conference? Their prestige elevated.
Yes.
Their recruiting elevated. Everything about their athletic program basically elevated. Why would that same thing not happen to Texas?
Well, because I think that they're moving into a conference that already has an SEC school that has had more success than them recently. Also, they're moving in with the conference mate. They're not just Texas A&M came over with Missouri. Missouri, I know they went to the 2 initial SEC championship games, but Missouri was not the powerhouse that Oklahoma is. Texas is taking a back seat when it comes to on-field production. Texas is taking a back seat to Oklahoma in this move. Texas might get the headline. They might get their name first, but they're the worst program.
They got the most money
after Texas A&M.
Between the 2 teams that's coming in.
Yeah, but they've had the most money last year. They had the most money the year before that. How'd they do? The year before that, how'd they do? Oklahoma has been dominating them with less money for a while, so I feel like other SEC schools will figure out how to get that done as well.
Being in the SEC and being in the rich state of Texas, would that help their recruiting?
It couldn't hurt. I think one of the reasons the Texas A&M, I think the biggest reason that Texas A&M took a leap forward was because Texas, all this stuff about how Texas is back. Texas never took a step to being back. If you look through the NFL draft, I don't think Texas had. I think they've had 1 player drafted in the first round in the past. It was either half a decade or a decade. But if you look at the guys that they're putting in the NFL, they're not doing it at a high level. And Texas A&M, I think, took advantage of that.
Okay.
I think Oklahoma took advantage of that.
Fair enough.
I think that might be one of the motivations for Texas to join SEC. They don't want other SEC schools to be taking advantage of what they perceive as their recruiting base. So maybe they think that they'll be able to even it out and get whatever guy that they want now that they're in the same conference as the great big Alabama and the LSUs and the Auburns of the world.
Any other school? You say Texas and Texas A&M will be hurt. Any other school?
Yeah, I think schools of the caliber of LSU, Auburn, I think those schools might take a step down because I do believe Oklahoma is on par with LSU and above Auburn. I think Texas has the ability to be on par or above literally any program. I know I just disparaged Texas, but I am going to acknowledge that they do have the potential and the ability, just based on their fertile recruiting and their donors and boosters. I do think that they have the ability to be the best program in the country.
If Texas and Oklahoma came into the SEC West and Alabama and Auburn moved to the SEC East, how would Texas and Oklahoma do in the SEC West?
I think they would do exactly how they pretty much have been doing in the Big 12. I think Oklahoma would probably become the best program in the SEC West at that point, and I think Texas would be a middle of the pack program.
So you are telling me that the SEC West without Alabama and Auburn is similar to the Big 12 without Oklahoma and Texas?
Yeah, I mean, you take out Alabama and Auburn, those are two pretty significant programs. I mean, you still have LSU, but I mean, Mississippi State, Mississippi, Arkansas, which is a school that left because they wanted to get out outside of Texas as well. You'd have Arkansas, Texas A&M, LSU. I think it'd be slightly better, but I think Oklahoma. I mean, Oklahoma's better than Texas A&M. Oklahoma's better than Texas. Unfortunately, Oklahoma's better than Arkansas. They're better than Mississippi. They're better than Mississippi State. The only question is LSU.
So does Texas A&M have a shot at becoming equal to Oklahoma?
No, I don't think on a level playing field, Texas A&M has a shot to become equal with Oklahoma. They don't even have the shot to become equal with Texas, which is I think is an inferior program to Oklahoma.
Okay. Let's move on to.
Just so we're clear, like Oklahoma is one of the 3 best programs of all time. Like, I remember 5 years ago when the AP put out their greatest programs of all time list, and the USA Today put out their competing greatest programs of all time. Oklahoma never finished past 3. So that's what they're like. Oklahoma. I understand Texas has the name and Texas has the rivalry with Texas A&M, but Oklahoma is the focal point to me.
Okay, let's move on. I want to ask you a question about Oklahoma State.
Fair enough.
How can Oklahoma actually get away from Oklahoma State?
That's the question on everyone's mind. I was just listening to a news report earlier today about how Oklahoma State reached out to the Big Ten because schools have to reach out to conferences. Conferences can't reach out to schools, or else that's tampering or something. Something happens, and apparently the Big Ten was somewhat receptive to that, but no one really knows. I went on some Oklahoma message boards. No one knows, based on the language of Oklahoma's legislator. No one knows if Oklahoma can divorce itself from Oklahoma State in the conference without risk of being sued. But what I did find out is that if Oklahoma tries, litigation will be brought. Like, a lawsuit will happen from Oklahoma State's perspective. So I guess that's for a court of law to determine. Maybe we have to call my sister. I don't know.
Okay, JJ, with realignment on the horizon, what will be some of the most sought after schools? And even if they are currently in a conference, they still may be sought after by another country. Just what are a couple of schools that will really be sought after?
Well, most of the schools that would be sought after would be the ACC, but I think the ACC has some type of agreement. I'm not entirely sure about, but I don't think all of those schools can be pursued. I definitely know the North Carolina ones cannot. So if we're gonna remove the Clemsons of the world and the Florida States, the obvious, and I think a school like West Virginia would be good. I think they would fit in with the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12. I think SEC. I think they would be sought after. I think I already said Houston, UCF, Georgia Tech. I'm not sure how sought after they would be. They're mostly just a product of their location, just by virtue of them being in Georgia. I feel like that they would be given a look. Kansas is very interesting because Kansas doesn't really provide the market that you want, but it is one of the 3 to 4 best basketball programs in the country. So then it just makes you wonder how much you value basketball. But I think Kansas, I mean, they're atrocious when it comes to football, but they do bring some value. BYU is interesting in the value that they bring. They have the BYU network, which I think has 3 million. There's either 3 million subscribers to the BYU network, or there's 3 million Mormons across the United States. I can't really remember, but they have their own unique appeal.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think UCF and Houston are the big winners. They're gonna join the big boy table in some conference. Some conference will take them.
Very good for them. I want to talk about the Big Ten. Let's assume that you are commissioner of the Big Ten. Would you entertain? I'm sorry. Let's assume you are the commissioner of the SEC.
Okay.
Would you entertain the idea of Ohio State and Clemson coming into your conference? Would you stop at Texas and Oklahoma?
I would put any Ohio State or Clemson athletic director or anyone that's capable of making those decisions on the first thing smoking to whatever SEC headquarters are and sign those papers on the dot. Yeah, that would bring in so much more revenue. Yes, I would be interested in making more money.
Let me ask you this. If you are the Ohio State University president, would you consider leaving the Big Ten, joining the SEC?
Yeah, because this is the reason Texas and Oklahoma are doing this is for financial purposes. If the financial incentive is great enough, I would absolutely consider it. But it would not be my preference. But yeah, if you make me an offer I couldn't refuse, I might not refuse it.
Okay, so if Ohio State were to do that, they would no longer be the preeminent school in their conference. So would they lose by doing that, as
Yeah.
Texas would be losing?
Yeah, I mean that's part of that's one of the concessions that you'd have to make. So you'd have to be worth a lot of money.
Do you think that there is a possibility, even ever so slight, that Ohio State may one day leave the Big Ten?
I think there's a very less than slight or more than slight possibility that the Big Ten isn't a conference that exists in the next 10 years. So yeah, I would definitely say that there's all the possibilities are on the table. I think Ohio State could leave. I think that there's not going to be a Big Ten or SEC to talk about in a decade. I could see all of these things happening.
Well, obviously, JJ, it seems to me that you have a perspective of what the future landscape of football or conferences is going to look like. Would you share that with our listeners?
I think we've been on a slow march to a mega conference with 64 to 76 schools, give or take. And, I think we've been on a slow march that way for a while, and I think momentum is starting to pick up, and I think the ball is rolling downhill a little bit. I think we're going to have a mega conference pretty soon. Members of the Pac-12. I think the Big 12, for the most part, you can throw them aside, and instead of Power 5, you can really think of it as a Power 4 going forward with the Pac-12, the Big 10, the SEC, and the ACC. And honestly, the Pac-12, outside of Oregon and USC, UCLA, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Pac-12 schools were left out. I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon State didn't make the list.
JJ, this is interesting. When we came on the program, came on the air, you said that the old saying was, "Young men go west."
Yeah.
Actually, Horace Greeley said, "Go west, young man." I'm going to say maybe the Big Ten should go west. What if the Big Ten was to add elite school like Stanford, Oregon to the Big Ten? How would that counter the Texas, Oklahoma? And I said it because adding Stanford, no one will doubt Stanford's academics. You get that California market. You add Oregon. Oregon is the most colorful school in the country. How would that impact the Big Ten? And what are the chances they could get those schools to come?
I would say 1%, maybe less than 1% chance. I think that would impact things on a very interesting plane just by thinking of you have a school in Palo Alto, California on one end of the spectrum, and then another school in College Park, Maryland. I mean, I understand that the country is shrinking and the world as a whole is shrinking, and it's never been easier to get from one place to another. But that would be something. I can't really fathom that. I can't really fathom that at this point in time. But I don't see the benefit for Stanford or Oregon to do that. I mean, obviously, we're talking finances and everything like that, but Stanford makes so much money outside of its athletics. I don't think it's gonna. I don't think it would be beholden to that the same way a school like the West Virginia might. I don't think that. I think that they would rather be in a conference with their big rival Cal Berkeley, with the UCLA's and the USC's of the world. I don't really necessarily see them fitting in with the Big Ten.
Okay. But is that an option that the Big Ten would be interested in?
Oh yeah, of course. I just don't think that they could get Oregon or Stanford.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I think the Big Ten is interested in acquiring as much name brands as they possibly can.
Okay.
Because if I'm the Big Ten, I'm worried about what you suggested earlier about Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State potentially leaving.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, JJ, are there any additional items, situations, thought that you want to bring to light with what's going on the landscape of conference realignment?
Well, I really have nothing more to add on that topic, I guess.
Okay. Well, okay, then we're going to get ready to close this discussion down. We will be back with a review of the NBA draft soon, so make sure all your listeners come back and listen to the post-NBA draft. With that being said, what's Spanish for see you later or whatever? Or adios.
Adios, hasta la vista.
All right. Next time, people. Peace out.
Until then.